Wow, that was amazing. I've watched that documentary before, of course, and it really seems different now. I just have to say, and there are moments where I have to confess I teared up in a way that I don't think I did in previous viewings. So, Scott and Laura, thank you so much for creating that documentary and preserving that treasure, that gem for us. I'm not going to talk for very long. I just want to remind people that although our crowdcast is recorded, the documentary will not be preserved in the recording. And luckily, you can purchase your own copy. I'll repost the link in the chat here so that you can purchase this through the Mark Twain House Museum store. And of course, your purchase there supports the museum. I'm also going to point out that people had wonderful questions during sessions 1 and 2, which were our introduction and the screening of the documentary. Those questions did not translate into this third session where we're having a discussion and Q&A at the end. So if you did ask a question, I saw there were great questions there. Can you please take a moment and repost your question in the Ask a Question area? That would be terrific. And having said all that, I'm just going to, again, thank Scott and Laura and welcome Cindy once again. And I'm going to sit back and enjoy their discussion. And I'll see you all in just a moment. Not a moment, a few moments when we do the Q&A. I hope it's longer than a moment. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer. Scott and Laura, I just have to echo Jennifer's thanks, and I'm sure the gratitude felt by everybody tonight. I see 471 people on this. I don't know how many people saw it for the first time. This is not my first time seeing it, but it's my first time since Hal passed away in January, and it's a whole new perspective. Beautiful, stunning. I don't need to tell you all the adjectives. You've heard them all, but really takes on a whole different feel now that you preserved such a legacy in this way. I know we're going to have a lot of questions from some others. I did have a couple things I wanted to ask that you would share. The first thing I'd love for you to do is share with the audience how you came to make this documentary, because there's a backstory.
Sure. Well, Laura and I had the privilege of making a movie with Hal several years ago. It's called That Evening's Sun, and in fact, Hal's with me right there. He's with me every day in my office right there. That's our poster. And we met Hal and Dixie on that movie. And in fact, the very first time I ever met Dixie, I had met Hal previously when we were talking about the possibility of him working on the movie. And he was still trying to figure out if he wanted to do it. And I went up to their house to visit with them because we had also written a small role in the movie for Dixie as Hal's wife that he sees in his dreams. And I went up there to talk to them about making this movie with us. And something about Dixie, she just had this power, like she just saw something in our conversation or me or whatever. And she said, for a long time, my dream has been to see a documentary made about the Mark Twain show. And I think you should be the one to make that movie. And I was like, okay, well, that sounds great, but let's make this other movie first, and then we'll figure out whatever you want to do. And frankly, I, at that point, was pretty unfamiliar. I had seen the CBS special, which they replayed on PBS in the 80s and 90s when I was a kid. And I was vaguely familiar with it, but I don't think I'd ever seen it in full. In fact, so I assumed at this point, if he was still doing it, which I was shocked to find out. And then I was like, if he's still doing it, it must be some sort of, canned, act you'd see in Branson, Missouri or something. And you'd go and he tells jokes in a white suit or whatever. And Dixie looked at me and she said, you've never seen the show. And I said, no, ma'am. She goes, you need to see the show. And so I went out to see it, and he wasn't playing in Southern California at that point. We did go and make that other movie, by the way, which is great. So I built this relationship with them, and I think I gave them some confidence in my ability to make this movie. And then I drove out to Mesa, Arizona with Rodney Taylor, who was the cinematographer who shot the documentary. Amazing. He shot our first movie too. And we drove out from LA to Arizona because he wasn't playing anywhere in Southern California in that season. And we drove out and we saw the show and spent the day with Hal and sort of watched his whole backstage, the whole routine, the whole process. And he let us into that very intimate space with him. And we sat there as he did his makeup and we just learned about the history of the show. And then I went and watched the show and I was blown away. And I called Laura and I just said, okay, we have to figure this out. And we started talking to Dixie, and Dixie wanted to produce it with us. And she had some connections to some potential financing. And we were talking to her. This is all early 2010. And then shockingly, Dixie passed away that April, and sort of out of nowhere. And we were all stunned. And Laura and I just got together and said, okay, we got to figure out how to do this. And we just started calling in favors, asking people. We didn't have any financing. We self-financed this movie, basically. We're just calling in favors, asking people. And once people heard about it, once people who knew Hal or had seen our movie or just had worked with us on the movie, people came out of the woodwork to help us out and to be a part of this journey. I don't know what you want to add, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible just to see how, willing and eager everyone was to get on board. And even our, some of these young crew members and things who helped out for free. And they just, wanted the opportunity to see Hal perform the show on stage too, which is such a special experience for everyone who touched it in any way. So it was like a true labor of love in every sense. So.
It has that feel. And I've been involved with one project in my life that was a labor of love. And I know that the rewards you get that way outweigh everything else. And I have another question about the format, the way you start off, you're on the way to the show, and how you just kept building and building, and you see Hal at different stages of getting ready for the show until, of course, that ending, which always blows me away. So when did that come to you? How did you decide to do it like that?
It took a while. I mean, this was my first documentary and my only one still. And what's great about the documentary, what's wonderful is there's no script, there's no story. You're just gathering information. It's like you're just gathering materials and resources, gathering clay, chunks of clay, and you put all the clay, you have this big pile of clay, and then you have to make the structure. You got to form the piece of art, and out of all this clay, which could go anywhere. This could go over here. This could go over here. I love structure, and I write screenplays. The structure of the thing is very important to me. It's a part of the way you tell it. One of my heroes is Flannery O'Connor, and she said, it's not just the story you tell, it's the way you tell the story, because that has meaning too. But it took us a couple of years. Now, one of the benefits of being the only ones that Laura and I were financing the movie ourselves. So one of the benefits is there's not a financier sitting over your shoulder saying, you have to finish it. We need to put it out. So we took 2 years. We shot the movie for 4 or 5 years, over the course of 4 or 5 years. We edited the movie. We took different cuts to see people like you. We would brought it to the conference. We brought different works in progress, the people, we would show it. And because we were trying to figure it out, for example, for a long time, this is on the DVD, there's an alternate opening for the first year or more. We probably showed this opening maybe at the conference. It was this opening on the river, and it's a whole different opening. And something about it just wasn't alive. It was beautiful and sort of somber, and it was Hal sort of reading as a voiceover of his performance, talking about the life on the river. Something about it just didn't have the energy. So what I was struck by when I went to see the show, like most people are struck by, is how relevant, how contemporary it feels, how poignant, how fierce, and aggressive. And I wanted the movie to have this energy, I wanted it to be both timeless and contemporary, because that's what I saw the show as. The show was that to me. It was timeless and was that to us. And that's why I shot it in black and white. I wanted all the footage to sort of blend together into one fabric. It's the fabric of this life that he has lived. And so I shot it all black and white to sort of even the colors. And then I wanted it to, but I wanted the movie to have this energy, because I think if you went to a movie about Hal Holbrook doing a Mark Twain show, you might expect that opening on the river. No, it's very elegiac and it's very sort of reverent and quiet or whatever. But that's not what the way the experience was for me. And about a year into editing, maybe more, I just was feeling, the movie was feeling a little bit flat. And we just stepped back and I just said, well, what if that was here? And what if the opening was like, we just dropped you into a moment, like, boom, you're in a moment. It's 1:45 in the morning in a hotel with Hal, which is like the last place you expect to be at the beginning of this movie. And and suddenly it came alive. You know, I knew I wanted the structure of the film to be sort of this intertwining snake of a day in the life of the show, like charting the whole process from when he wakes up to when he ends the show, and intercut with the history of the show, like Hal telling you the history. That was the spine, those two things weaving in and out with these branches sticking out of performance, the show clips, and then interviews with other people. And those were kind of the branches coming off the spine. And then it was just about picking which pieces. And I love that. I love messing around with structure, moving something over here. And Laura was a great resource for that. I mean, like, so Laura is the producer of the film, which means she manages a lot of the logistics of it, but she's also a great creative partner. And Laura and I, this was our second movie at the time when we made this movie. I trust her deeply, and especially her creative instincts. And so I would just bounce things off of her. And I don't know how your experience was, Laura, as the structure evolved.
Yeah, I remember early on you talking about it kind of like a concert film, wanting to do kind of that idea, which I thought was really inspired and an interesting approach to it. And then, I mean, same, I have such deep belief in Scott as an artist and visionary. So it was really, you know, about just kind of supporting his vision through it, and obviously having feedback and all that. But things like the black and white, which I think are just so organic and true to this film, and I think have that timeless essence that just serves it so well. That's the type of thing that probably if we had financing, we wouldn't have been able to do. So there was a beauty in that kind of labor, you know, just like scrape it together that way, that allows a real creative freedom. And the time we had, like you said, I think probably the best documentaries take many, many years, because one, the story is discovering itself, and then also just that time to, you know, have a cut and let it marinate and step away and come back a few months later and watch it again, and you have new ideas. And if you're rushed, you just can't, the creative process, you know, I think can't like fully flourish if you're on a deadline.
I think you really described it well when you compared it to a live concert, because it's a live performance and we're expecting that. And anybody who's had that experience of, you know, going to a live show, what do you do after the show? You have this amazing show that's lifted you up, that's rattled you a little bit, that's really stirred something emotionally. And when it's over, you just want to talk about it. You want to talk to the person who went with you and say, oh my God, that part, when he said this, when he did that. And every time I've watched this documentary with different friends and family members, that's what we do when it's over. It's like the drive home after the concert or the show, the performance. And we're going back over the minutes and the moments. And it's like we were talking before we got back together here in the group about that scene where you're with Joyce and you're going through Hal's storage trunks of all these years and of all the pieces. You know, this was the first time seeing it since Hal died, and you coming across that note. I mean, what a moment. And of all the moments you shot, to pick that one and include it, wow, the impact that it has now. It used to make me laugh, but tonight it made me cry.
Yeah, it's so hard to, in a movie like this where you're not following an event as it's developing, meaning like this was a documentary about whatever, like politics or something that was happening actively, and then we were chasing a story. The story was sort of already happened and we were retelling it. One of the biggest challenges in that kind of story is to have any sort of spontaneity for things to happen that you don't expect.
Right.
That discovering that letter was an authentic. That's the first time I'd ever seen it. I opened it on camera and I read it, and and you know, it just was a very surprising. Joyce, I don't think Joyce had ever seen it, or she had forgotten if she ever did, because she was very stunned by the.
Yeah.
She has a laugh in it, you know. She's like, says, "Oh God, how?" But
She
you know,
scolded him.
yeah, that was his sort of very caustic sense of humor. But you know, Hal was an old soul from a very early age, and you know, when you have that kind of childhood, I mean, it could have been, it's Dickensian, you know. It's like it has this sort of, it's tragic in a lot of ways, but he rose up from that childhood of abandonment, and but that forced him to be, you know, very mature very early. And
now,
so.
people ask me all the time, where can I get the whole show of Hal Holbrook performing? Well, there's not one show. He never did the same show twice in the thousands of times he performed. The old version from the 60s is just a snapshot, and it's lovely. But of course, since then, he's performed many more times. Now, you filmed him live, and you had to pick and choose certain which parts, like the War Prayer or Huckleberry Finn, which, you know, something made you choose certain pieces. Did Hal have input? Was it like your gut feeling which pieces of the actual performance you wanted to include and juxtapose against his story?
Yeah, it was much like the opening, where it was, this is not where you expect to be, 1:45 in a hotel room with this guy taking a bunch of notes. I just wanted the film to relay the experience I had when I saw the show the first time, which was the surprise, you know, the surprise at how relevant and timely it was. So rather than choose some of the more traditional, sort of perhaps more humorous Twain stories for the movie itself, we just decided that we really wanted this thing to have teeth, you know, because the show has teeth.
Right.
And we only had a limited amount of time to put actual show footage in. The irony is that the irony of the movie is that there's not a ton of the show in the movie, but it is
an appetizer.
Right. You know, because it's trying to do a lot. It's a movie about the Twain show. It's a movie about an actor's life, the life of an actor. It's a movie about a father and a man trying to reconcile, you know, with his past and his family. It's a lot of things, I hope, which really is reflective of the scope of Hal's life. But choosing I think Laura and I both gravitated toward those pieces that just got you, this poked you, you know, poked at you, because I want to be poked that way. I want to be provoked. I want to have to go, God, did he just say that? Did he say that about guns and Christians? And I was like, whoa. And it made me think. It made me sit there and go, wow, what does Twain have to teach me about life, about, you know, and how are we making these same mistakes that he was writing about, you know, 150 years ago. So
I think those choices too were like, they kind of correlate to Hal's spirit when he was choosing the material for the show. That same idea, how much he loved to kind of, you know, come in with a thing that really provoked and get the audience and make you think. So it's kind of reflective of.
He had told me that on the morning of the show, he would basically read the headlines, you know, we know what's in the news, see what's got people stirred up. And from current events, he would decide which material to include that night. And he warned me one night, he was bringing out that new piece. It was in New Hampshire, and he wasn't sure how it would go. Mallory Howard was there with me that night, and we both were shocked because the entire audience gasped at the same time. It was palpable. And then a few weeks after that, I saw him do it in Nashville, Tennessee, with a lot of friends. In fact, I had friends from all over the Southeast come in for that show. And the next day, Hal emailed and said, it was good to see you in half of the United States last night. but at the Nashville show, same thing. He builds you up. And man, it hurt. It was uncomfortable. But then he gives you that blessed relief of laughter. And his timing was so good that he could do that. He could get you up into an uncomfortable point that you know you're going to talk about it on the drive home. But at least in the moment, you can laugh and breathe and go back to enjoying the performance. But you know later it's going to come back and haunt you, and you're going to have to talk about it.
That's right.
Now,
That's right.
I have another question. Every Twain person in the world wants to know this. I want to know this. You filmed an entire show, at least one whole show to do this. So is there any possibility, any plan that you would put together that you would release that as its own, here you go, here's Hal doing the show? Because nothing like that exists.
We were just talking about that last week, actually. And, you know, I think that's not just up to us, obviously. Right. And Hal was very protective of this show. And it actually took it, you know, even with Dixie blessing us to make the movie, it still took a while for Hal to get on. It was much more of like Dixie's idea initially. Like he was a little like, I don't know if I trust you with this precious material, which good for him. You know, I think it was not until our film was finished and it came out and our film got a lot of nice, you know, reviews and Hal and won some awards, and Hal loved the movie, and I think that's why he slowly began to trust us to tell this story. But you know, he was protective of the show for good reason, but things are different now. He's not here, and it's something that I'll say this: it's something we're thinking about. It's not up to us, but it's certainly a thing we've discussed. We filmed 2 complete performances. Wow. And other parts of several other shows, and so you know, it's certainly possible. So
yeah, it feels like, knowing it exists, it would be a shame to not kind of have that out there for his legacy. But it is tricky because there also are very specific reasons he didn't permit anybody to film it for the many decades that he ran. Right. And I think because he liked that live, you know, ever changing.
Yeah, we had talked about that, and he echoed that. He felt this is a live performance. I want people to see me and to feel the energy and breathe the same air. It was we had asked him to do the voice of Mark Twain on our CD project, and he said, you know, I'm not a voice actor. I'm a presence. I'm a persona. I'm live when I do this. But he loved the project, and when we asked Clint Eastwood to come on board, he said, I would love to play Mark Twain, but I would only do it if I got Hal Holbrook's blessing. If you have to ask him first. I said, don't worry, we did ask him first. So now that we have, you know, Hal is no longer here, and we can't go see him anymore, and that's hard. I mean, there were a circle of us that, gosh, we'd see each other at these performances. We'd crisscross the country and run into each other, or plan to get together, have dinner together, or those famous midnight dinners with Hal after the show. So I just feel like now I realize that there are other things you have to discuss and people you have to talk with. So I guess I just wanted to put it out there publicly and say, I know I speak for a lot of people who would love to see that happen. I know that Jennifer's probably gathering up questions, but I have to ask you, I'd love for you to share with the audience some of the critical acclaim that came with this documentary. I mean, it really got great recognition when you made this film.
I mean, I mean,
just opening at the American Film Institute documentary.
That was really.
I was going to say I don't keep my reviews on. I keep my reviews right here next to my computer, so I can only the good ones though. I don't have those on hand, but we were able to take it and. AFI Docs, their big film festival in Washington, D.C. We were the opening night film, and we were able to sneak preview it a couple of days before that at the LA Film Festival, and we took it around the country to a bunch of different film festivals. Got a lot of great. It was a lovely for us more than anything, and is being with people to show the movie. In fact, you know, one of the hardest things about this last year, Laura and I made another movie that came out in April. It's called The Quarry, and we had to release it into the pandemic, and so we weren't able. It was supposed to premiere at South by Southwest. It couldn't do that, and so to this day, I've never seen the film with an audience, and so which is deeply dissatisfying, and because we make movies to sit with people and discuss them and watch them. It's one of the great joys of independent cinema is that you get to experience it with people. The film festival circuit is a precious and really vital, important part of filmmaking and film watching, and that's a big, important thing for Laura and I. So, so doing that with Holbrook Twain was the best part. Was just taking, going around the country and sitting with people and having that experience and hearing them, come up afterwards and talk about what parts meant the most to them. And reviews are great and whatever, but it's like really it's those, and awards are nice, all that stuff's great, and it's lovely, but it's really about hearing people say that the movie touched them and that they learned something, or that they were moved by something, or that they think about the world a little bit differently now. And that's not the movie, that's really Hal and Mark Twain and what they brought and what they taught us, taught me and Laura especially. And just like as we made the movie, I learned a lot about myself. The movie is in some ways it's a cautionary tale. I mean, he made this great work of art. It did not come without cost, and that's something that I think maybe doesn't get talked about enough with this movie, but that's a part of it. And because Hal was so forthcoming with his own faults and and that part of his life, it gave permission to us to talk about that in the movie, because Hal talked about it first. And so we didn't feel like we were betraying any trust to go talk to his children, to go, because we didn't want it to be hagiography. We didn't, this is a real person who's doing this. And, Hal and I, we go head to head a little bit sometimes, especially making our first movie, like it's making movies is tough, and he's a tough man. But I respected him deeply, and his story was one that I thought was just so powerful and worth telling, and that drove us through this whole experience.
Yeah. That was one of I think at the outset too, that was part of it. It was, we were very excited to make it, but we didn't want him to have final, we weren't willing to kind of be in a scenario where he had the final say or final cut or whatever, because Scott, I think we wanted the liberty to tell the story and not, to reflect truth. But then Hal embraced that because he is, a man about truth.
He really is. And we talked about it at one point, and I said, Mark Twain wrote his autobiography, and as he said, he was speaking from the grave, kind of like Hal's little note that you came upon, I'm speaking from the grave. And Mark Twain wrote his autobiography saying, keep it 100 years before it's published. I want to be able to speak freely. But I honestly don't think Mark Twain lived long enough to be as honest as he would have liked to have been. Whereas Hal, I was shocked the first time I saw the first rough cut of this documentary, because it was brutally honest and very painful and sad. And, but it was the honesty that really resonated with me. So whether it was because Hal lived longer or Hal lived more richly, I'm not sure. But, I told him, I really think as far as him and Mark Twain, he came out ahead on that. I mean, he told the truth. Mark Twain, I think he held back a lot of things. There are a lot of things Mark Twain that just didn't get out there. But
one of the well, I was just going to say one of the real one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my whole life, and probably for you too, Laura, was the first time we showed him the movie. So Laura and I went up to his house and went into his study and put it up on the big TV, and which is not the ideal way you want to show somebody a movie. You want to be in a theater or whatever, but for whatever reason we had to, and we just sat, and Lenore and I sat behind him as he watched the movie. And it's like, at that point, just like, okay, here we go. If he hates it, then we've wasted all this time.
You're holding your breath on every movement.
And I was really, we were really holding our breath when that section of the movie came up, because he didn't know anything that his children had said. He knew we talked to them, but that's all he knew. And when that came around, I just was sitting there and just praying that, And then the movie finished. I mean, you could see he had had a very emotional experience. And then he just looked at us and he just gave us a big hug, and he just said, well done, and he said, you told the truth. And that's all you can do.
He was adamant about the truth.
Yep.
So Scott, you asked him, did Mark Twain let him say things that he would have been uncomfortable saying as Hal Holbrook, which was a great question. And his answer was honest. It was truthful. It was typical Hal. When you look back at it now, and now that he's gone and we can't consult him anymore for whatever it is we want to consult him about, I mean, do you think about it? Are there unasked questions that you wish you had asked him, or do you feel like you were able to get it all?
I don't know. I don't have anything that I think I regret not asking him. I don't know about you, Laura.
That's an interesting question. But
I mean, but that is, I certainly felt, again, that's the value of having years to create this thing. Is that
right.
We really we would go back. I mean, we interviewed him several times. We followed him around. We'd go anytime what happened was anytime he would perform anywhere we could get to. So
by
anywhere
car.
sort of by car.
I'm going to
get to by car. We would go, and over this course of these several years, we would just go. We would just, whoever was available, we'd take them and we'd shoot them and so a lot of that backstage footage is taken over several different places, and he would just talk to us, and stories would come out and questions would come up. Because I had 3 or 4 hours every time just to sit with him back there as he would, and so just I was able to get through so many questions, and I would go back, and each time I came, I would have edited more of the movie, so I knew more of what I was missing, and so I would ask him those questions. It was really a great way it's like revising an essay or something. You get to go back and see what you're missing, and then add back to it, and just continue to gather that.
Yeah,
I don't have any regrets.
I think having to pick and choose, because even there were interviews that we did that we weren't able to incorporate, and just that process of kind of, whittling it down and having to pick and choose which aspects to include is really.
That would be tough. Well, I remember when we got wind of it, at the time I was still the director out in Hannibal at the Boyhood home, and Ryan Murray came in and said, he was so excited. He said, you can't believe this. They're making this documentary about Hal Holbrook. It's the same people who, did That Evening Sun. And anyway, it's in the works. And we were getting ready for our very first Clemens conference there. And we got a hold of you guys and said, any chance you'd like to come? And you were definitely, shoestring budget people. And it broke my heart. And like, well, how can we help? And you guys were so awesome because you came in and you stayed at the Hannibal LaGrange College in Hannibal. And you ate at the commissary there with all the Twain folks, and just
awesome.
It was so special. Yeah, I mean,
it was so cool to get to show you Hannibal, and you shot some beautiful footage. I remember Pam and Mike Ginsberg took you out on their pontoon boat, and we made great memories and had a great time. But you had such a great eye and ear, and you interviewed Bob Hurst and John Bird and Shelley Fisher Fishkin and so many people, and myself, obviously, but your willingness to just come out and talk to a whole bunch of Twainiacs to see what we had to say about how
huge.
You were in.
That was a huge resource for us, because that was an element that was where we were out of our element. We didn't know the world, and you brought us in and introduced us, and you became our liaison for so much of this project. And that was, I can't tell you how much you helped us make this movie, because you were able to connect us with so many people, and you legitimized us to the community, and that was really important to us. And that was 10 years ago. Can you believe that? 10 years ago was 2011.
Yeah.
Wow.
And whatever month it was, I think it was the spring or summer, but it was 2011.
The summer, August 2011.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
it's one of those, I can't imagine what the movie would be without you and Ryan having reached out and kind of initiated that.
That was That was, oh, I see Ryan's actually on the chat. Hey, Ryan.
Hi, Ryan.
Oh my gosh. Well,
Thank you, Ryan.
we could go down memory lane over and over, and I hope this isn't the end of our interaction and antics and whatever hijinks we may get up to in the future now that we're all getting vaccinated and whatnot. But I know that I can see 11 questions have stacked up. I will sit here and pick your brain all night, and that's not fair.
Yeah,
I'd love to
right.
let some of the viewers jump in and be able to ask their questions. And I think Jennifer's going to pop back on and kind of read and go through those. So
Cool.
there she is. Perfect timing.
Magic. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. This has been so fascinating. And we do have some great questions from our audience. I'm going to post a question right now, but Cindy, I don't want you to answer it until next Tuesday night when we're together again. Okay. So I would love to hear your reflections on Hal Holbrook's 90th birthday and the celebration that the Mark Twain House hosted on that occasion.
Cherished memory. I'll be happy to talk about it. Absolutely.
So that's your teaser, everybody. If you're in the audience tonight, please join us again a week from tonight to hear Shelley Fisher-Fishkin and Mark Twain and Steve Courtney and, of course, Sydney talk about their reflections of Hal Holbrook as a not just an actor, but as a human being that they all knew and worked with. So we have a lot of questions about Hal Holbrook's process. Like, how did he research other than reading Mark Twain? One of our questions is from our friend Ron. And what do you know about his process for research?
I mean, it was one thing that I was struck by was even toward the end, even near when he retired, up until then, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the way he would continue to discover new material, or like he told me once, he said, I found this new piece, and he was so excited. And at this point, he was probably 88 years old. And he was like, I'm so excited about this thing I found. And he said, I've read it 25 times, probably in my life, this piece, and I forget what it was, but it was from some essay or something. And he said, I've probably read it 25 times. And for whatever reason, it just struck me in a new way. And I saw the way that it would fit into what I'm doing, and he would edit, of course, and any passage might be from 4 or 5 or whatever sources that he would take all the words of Twain, but he would edit them, to make this other idea, this thing. And so that was the great skill. And, but really, I think it was, Cindy, you may know more, but it's just the voracious appetite to read everything he could get his hands on that Twain wrote, and really the act of contemplation and consideration as he sort of wrestled with whatever it meant and how it might fit into the larger arc of what Hal was interested in talking about. I don't know, Cindy.
He often would tell us what he was reading, and I remember him being very excited about reading newspaper accounts of Mark Twain's performances around the world. And he was reading these actual newspaper accounts. Those reporters would try to copy down verbatim what was being said on stage by Mark Twain. So now he was pulling pieces from those talks that Mark Twain gave, and because they were still relevant, putting them into the current show.
Wow.
Oh, fascinating. So there are a number of questions also about what was left on the cutting room floor, so to speak. What do you wish, given all the time in the world, did you record and learn about that you weren't able to include in this particular film?
I got some thoughts. Laura, do you have anything? For me, it was, we always said we could make a whole movie just about the Twain part of this. We could make a whole movie just about the actors part of this. We could make a whole movie just about the family part of this. That each section was so rich and full of material and history that that was the hardest thing. Laura mentioned that we interviewed several people, many Twain scholars who, unfortunately, we had to cut out of the movie, and that's never easy. But I think there are 8 or 9 people in the movie that we interviewed, 16, 17, 20 people, maybe actors, other actors. I mean, I hated to cut them out. But at just some point, you have to focus the movie. You wanted to keep it moving forward. You want everything to tie in to what you're doing, and that's part of the editing process. Is just really being. I mean, this could have been we could have made a 10-hour, documentary series, mini-series for, it could have been anything. We had so much footage, but I love the feeling of, like, you go to a show, the show's 2 hours, you go to the movie, you feel like you've had an experience, a singular experience, that the way the show is a singular experience. And then we just felt like we wanted that to be the thing that we make. Laura, do you have any regrets of it that we had to?
I can't think of anything specific, but yeah, just like you're saying, there was just so much rich material and thoughts and reflections on Hal and all that. It's just always a shame. It's been a while now, so I can't remember exactly, but I do know. I mean, Scott is such a brilliant writer as well. I think to really edit something like this together so seamlessly, where you feel like you're just kind of flowing through this piece, and as you're, evolving through different ideas and aspects of his life, it feels to me so seamless, which I think is really a tribute to it.
I have to tell you guys, Rich just weighed in, Hal's stage manager for many years. Rich just weighed in here with a post, and he suggests Holbrook Twain, the series. And I'm with you, Rich. I think that's a great idea.
Take it.
Hi, Rich.
Hey, Rich. Hey, buddy.
Awesome to have you here tonight.
I also have to give credit. I want to make sure Anthony Inarelli, who's the editor of the movie. I mean, I say I edit. I mean, so Anthony and I work together and very closely. But a lot of these sequences, my thing is structure of the movie. That's where I really come in. But Anthony would actually edit the sequence itself. So the way that pick any sequence, like the morning. So the first thing you see, which is like 1:45 hotel, Anthony cut that piece together. So he decides, like, when we cut, when we jump over here, when we move, how the story is told inside of those 3 minutes. So now I'm looking at the pieces. So that's one little piece. That's this 3-minute sequence. And then we have, the opening sequence. Then we have, like, the morning routine, the working out in the morning in the hotel. We have that piece. And then we have the first piece of the first performance piece. I'm looking at these as all little pieces of a puzzle. So what my interests are, and I think what my skills are, would be like arranging those puzzle pieces to fit. But Anthony's actually in there making the thing flow and feel. So we have Anthony, we have Rodney Taylor, who shot the movie, Heather McIntosh, who composed the score, which is really beautiful. All these wonderful people who worked on the film with us, and the other photographers besides Rodney who shot it. And so it's a real group effort and a collaboration that I want to be sure to acknowledge. And so, as I mentioned at the introduction, the DVD has a lot of these cut scenes. So it has this
I was so excited.
It has like this 8-minute piece on Huck Finn it's a mixture of interview and performance and storytelling. It's got 3 or 4 other performance clips. It's got interviews, Sean Penn, Cherry Jones, extra interviews we couldn't fit in. And so that's where some of them went. It's got this alternative opening I mentioned. So I was really grateful to be able to add a little bit to that. I don't really like having bonus footage a lot of times in my stuff, but this was one situation where I wanted more bonus footage. I wanted to give everyone as much as you wanted to have. And so it was nice to have that as well. And I'll mention, someone asked earlier, I'm going to put in the chat here, our first movie, That Evening Sun, is a little bit hard to find right now, but I'll put I put the link to this is where you can stream the movie. It's only streaming at this site right now. And there's no DVDs available at this moment, but you can watch the movie there if you're interested. And Hal gives an amazing, I mean, you see him right here. Look at him. He was 83 years old when that photograph was taken. Look how strapping he is there. Look at that buff guy with his shoulders. And so,
amazing.
It made me feel bad about myself, how strong he was. But anyways,
I'll never forget, we were shooting That Evening Sun. There's a scene where he's walking down this kind of creek bank, and it's a, precarious situation, and he's 82 and we filmed, I think, and I'm terrified that he's going to slip and fall, and the cut ends, and we're like, how are you okay? And he turns, I'm acting. It was like, oh, of course, he's totally fine.
Oh, it's so fascinating. You know, Mark Twain himself, an artist, a writer, and then Hal Holbrook creating his work of art based on Mark Twain, and now you two have created this work of art based on that. It's so meta. It's very
It's
cool.
a nice legacy. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's strange to think about too, how something that kind of just landed in our, it's kind of, obviously we had a vision for Hal being in the role in That Evening Sun, but that arbitrary that it works out, and then that this kind of lands in our laps, and it ends up becoming such a formative experience. I know for me as a producer, and just something, the whole journey was so educational and kind of reflective and continues to be. Each time I watch it, there just are different moments or different bits that strike me. And I think as artists as well, the way it, forces us to look at our lives too, and just the choices we're making. And it's so powerful to really think on that. So
Sure is. So speaking of powerful, Judy says, when discussing the reviews to his first full theatrical Mark Twain Tonight, Hal expressed concern about being trapped as Mark Twain and no longer having a full acting career. How do you think he felt about that at the end of his career?
It's a great
It's a great question, Judy.
He would, I think he expresses this a little bit in the movie, but I think he felt really grateful to have. It's interesting to see the evolution of his relationship to this show. When it started out so sort of functional for him, in a sense of like it was this thing that he could do to provide for his family, and how it grew to just become such a means of expression for him, and I think he had just and by the time the latter half of his life, and he was able to go out and perform the show a few times a year, those last 20 years or so, he would average 20 or so performances or something a year, I think he was doing. And that's almost half the year you're out on the road, because he's doing it on the weekends only usually, and that's half the weekends. But it's also opening up his schedule to do movies and television or other roles, and so he found some balance that was really healthy for him, but he really loved the expression. I think he loved that ability to say those things that otherwise he couldn't say, and I don't know. I
wonder too if it just gave kind of like a through line and some structure to, I think, what can be a very, kind of transient life. Or a lot of actors I know, I think, feel a lot that they're just kind of lost at sea, and you're, very much subject to other people's whim. Like you just don't have any control really. And it gave him some real agency in his path and something to, kind of focus on and be passionate about all the way through, which I think is really beautiful.
So a number of people have asked, who's next? Who is there an actor, a writer, anybody who is particularly poised to continue portraying Mark Twain and giving us access to him? Cindy's shaking her head.
That's a Cindy. It's a Cindy Lovell question,
Oh, maybe Terry Jones can reprise her role from childhood.
Okay.
I'd actually love. That's a great idea. I would love to see Cherry.
Amazing.
If anybody could do it, we need a petition for Cherry Jones to take over Mark Twain Tonight. That is something even Hal would be excited
about.
And
that's Hal bless. Exactly.
The thing about Hal is, and I know we're going to talk about this next week with Mark DeWidziak and Shelley Fisher-Fishkin, and the Hal and Scott, you said it earlier. Hal was a true Mark Twain scholar. He researched constantly. It might have been to pay the bills in the beginning, and actors like Laura just said, you're always waiting for that next gig to come along and have employment. But Mark Twain was his steady, regular, he could count on it. But he did not just package a performance and deliver the same thing twice. He never did it twice. It varied every time. And who can fill those shoes? I don't know of anybody. Now, I will say, and I hate to pick on Mark tonight, but Mark Twain, who will be with us next week, has performed as Mark Twain in the Mark Twain House, and he is a Twain scholar, and he has spent a lot of years with it. And I don't know that Mark would want to go on the road and even try to do what Hal has done, and I'll let him speak to that. But it's hard. I mean, I've known many, oh my goodness, so many Mark Twain impersonators, performers, Jim Waddell in Hannibal, Richard Gere in Hannibal, Lewis Hankins on the American Queen riverboat, and they put their heart into it. They clearly love Mark Twain. I think the difference is that Hal made a lifetime of it. He became, as a young man, he was making himself look old, and he was researching and becoming a Twain scholar as a young man, never having any clue of what it was to become. So who's out there now? Maybe some 20-year-old who's watching this, who's saying, you know what? I think I'd like to play Mark Twain. So I think maybe there's some in the making. But yeah, let's get Cherry Jones in the meantime.
There you go.
Seriously.
Love it.
That's awesome. So this could go on forever, but I'll ask one more question of each of you. And that is, given your time with Hal Holbrook, what is your takeaway? What did you learn? How did it change you?
Well, I it's interesting. When he died, I was overcome with just a tremendous sense of gratitude. That week that after I found out he passed away, it was an unexpected feeling that I just had, because basically my work from a professional perspective, he was the dominant presence in my life for 10 years. Like we made 2 movies together, and one of them I spent years and years working on, and he became a dear friend, and that was, and he was, and those 2 movies were my first 2 movies, and so he was a crucial component of sort of the beginning of my career, and I just realized, I just was able to walk around and take stock of what a tremendously positive impact he had on my life, and from the very like pragmatic elements of like the work ethic and the life of an artist, and the work he put into his art, the things I learned from that, the vulnerability, the truth, the honesty which he expressed himself, which he allowed his flaws to be seen, all these things influenced me. But just to have it all, I never had like a mentor or a wise old sage in my life, to give me wisdom, and he became that for me in a lot of ways, and I'm just immensely grateful for my time with him, and the fact that we have made something that people feel honors him and his legacy, while honoring Mark Twain as well. Is I couldn't be more proud of that.
Mm-hmm.
That's lovely. Thank you, Scott. Laura, would you like to share?
Yeah, I don't know if I could say anything better than more on point than that, but same. I think I feel very lucky and grateful that we, kind of chanced upon the opportunity to capture this. And like I said, the kind of personal growth I've had too through the course of making it, and some of that related to Hal and just the process and my relationship with Scott as an artist and a human, and it's just opened my eyes so much. And I think I'll always think about and be inspired by his constant desire to learn and grow, right up to the day he passed, which I just think is, such an essential and beautiful way to live your life. So there are just certain kind of, I think, nuggets and truths that he imparted that I don't know, some of them in a way they're maybe obvious, but like they just came to us in such a visceral way in the time we spent with him that they'll always just hold so close to me in my heart. So yeah, I'm just also very grateful to have had the chance to be a part of this.
Oh. So yeah, Cindy, do you want to add anything?
Sure. When I fell in love with Mark Twain in the 4th grade, and I didn't actually fall in love with Mark Twain. I read Tom Sawyer. So Tom Sawyer became my favorite book. And later in junior high, I found out there were more books by Mark Twain. And then later I realized that Mark Twain was a person and his own life was really interesting. And so as a teenager and a young adult, he became my favorite author, and he became someone I really was interested in, and just continued to be, and never really, I still never stopped reading Tom Sawyer. I still teach it at the college level. But the first time I saw Hal Holbrook, I didn't go to see Hal Holbrook. I went to see Mark Twain. And I meant that very seriously, that this was the closest I could ever come to seeing Mark Twain. And Hal gave me that. And my son mailed my record album covers to me. I was in Iowa in grad school, and I said, Adam, send me my album covers from Hal Holbrook. And I took them along that night, and I waited afterwards. It's the first time I met Hal. But remember, I was there to see Mark Twain, and I basically wept through the entire performance. I mean, it was so moving, and even the funny parts moved me. I just kept crying and crying, and I was so happy. And I'm here with Mark Twain. Finally, I waited. I can't believe I'm with Mark Twain at last. And so at waiting backstage, and I have my record album, and I've obviously been crying, and I handed it to him, and he signed it for me. And I said, I waited my whole life to meet you. And he knew what I meant. And he said, not Hal Holbrook. And I said, Mark Twain. He said, I know. And I must have been one of thousands who felt that way. But then after that, I saw him a total of 20 times in many venues. And I watched him after the show backstage, meet and greet people from childhood that he hadn't seen in years. One night in Florida, I saw him greet somebody, Priscilla, and then he explained to all those around us, we knew each other in childhood. And then one night in Long Island, New York. Now, in the meantime, fast forward, I had been so blessed to come to Hannibal twice and perform, and then of course later to Hartford for his 90th birthday performance. But this night, and when I booked him, I would go through his booking agency and talk to a man named Klaus Kolmar. And Klaus was his agent, his representative. And Klaus and I would speak on the phone. I had never met him. But there in Long Island that night, I was waiting patiently for a moment to be able to say, I loved your show. And Hal came in the room, and there was an older gentleman in a wheelchair. And Hal is an older gentleman too, but he bent down with those long legs of his, right down at eye level with this gentleman in the wheelchair. And they had a tete-a-tete that went on for probably close to a half an hour. And everyone there to see Hal waited very patiently. And when he finished, he stood up straight as he always did. And he told us, he said, everyone, this is Klaus Kolmar. He was my agent for however many years. And he said, we never signed a contract. We had a handshake deal. We did it old school. And that was Hal. And from going from believing that I had finally met Mark Twain, that I had finally interacted and been in the presence of Mark Twain, to somehow along the years getting to know Hal Holbrook, getting to know this amazingly generous man who would come and give us a very special, Mark Twain Boyhood Home, Mark Twain Museum special rate for his performance, and how generous he was. Every one of his performance, the program would always have a line in there to please donate and support the Mark Twain Papers and Project in Berkeley. I mean, his heart was so capacious and he was so generous. And once he even told a newspaper, I think it was in Hartford, he kidded that I stalked him around the country because popping up in San Diego or somewhere. But he was so generous with his time and his advice and just everything. And so I when you say gratitude, I mean, what other word can there be? I came for Mark Twain, but I stayed for Hal Holbrook.
Wow,
we should put that in the movie. I want to refilm. I want to film
there you go.
go back in, recut the movie, put it out again.
Scott, this is being recorded, so you can just cut the
There
clip right from there. Edit it
right
right in. It's fine. Oh my goodness, what a wonderful evening, Scott and Laura. I don't know, have you been to the Mark Twain House in Hartford, Connecticut?
We have, yeah, we've been. I think we've been everywhere. I think we haven't not missed any of the houses or museums. I think we've been to them all.
Yeah.
Well, we want you to come back when it's safe to do so, which is going to be very, very soon. So thank you for just a delightful evening. My colleague, Alex, has posted a link for next Tuesday night in the chat there. So please, everybody, join us again. Please do yourself a favor and get this so that you can be inspired over and over again by Hal Holbrook's story as told so beautifully by Scott and Laura. Thank you so much, Cindy. We'll see you again next Tuesday. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, for your enthusiasm, for your great questions, and thank you for all of you who have donated via the donate button. We really appreciate it. And thank you all so much.
It was lovely. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Love you all.
Bye.